Greetings, I'm Zachary Hepner. Pleased to share this Dvar Torah with you for Parashat Lech Lecha. Brit milah is important, but why? Before addressing the foreskin, let's address the forefathers. Chazal observe that someone uncircumcised is an arel, and the opposite of an arel is tamim, which means unblemished. Note that the Romans viewed circumcision as a blemish, while the sages saw matters the opposite. As in the Bereshit, Rabbah, Tanchuma, and Yerushalmi, Amru lo mלכות הרשעה לאברהם אבינו, המילה הזאת שאתם עושים. אמר להם, על שם שנאמר, ונמלתם בבשר לכם. אמרו לו, דבר זה שאתם עושים הוא מום בגוף. The Romans indeed considered it an actual blemish. The opposite of a blemish is tamim. And the command for tamim is to perform milah. Similarly, in the Midrash Tanchuma, Lech Lecha 17, אמרו Rabbi Akiva, עד שלא מלאת חסרת, וכשנמלת נקראים tamim, שנאמר התהלך לפני והיה tamim. So here explicitly, the opposite of a chaser is a tamim. The word chaser is a language for blemished sacrifices. Rabbi Akiva considers it a blemish to be uncircumcised. A tamim refers to an unblemished animal, which is similar to Bereshit Rabbah 46:4. Rabbi Abba bar Kahana Amar, Kol zman shehaya Avraham arel haya chaser, ukevan shenimo nikra tamim, shenemar hitalech lefanai v'haya tamim. So here Genesis Rabbah considers an arel to be a blemish, and a nimol to be unblemished. Furthermore, even prior to divine fiat, it's a spiritual defect, and Abraham was blemished even prior to being commanded to circumcise himself. Just as it says in Parashat Rabbi Eliezer 29, Amru lo hakadosh baruch hu laAvraham, ad shelo malta hayita chaser, nishemalta nishlam shimcha, v'nishlam gufecha. Parashat Rabbi Eliezer indicates that even Abraham's name was also blemished until his milah, when God filled in the extra letter to his name from Avram to Avraham. On a side note, Parashat Rabbi Eliezer is in contrast to Shakespeare, where in Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 2, Juliet says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title." You know, scholars spend their career betting on who, in fact, the man from Stratford was. And I'm only aiding their guesswork by pointing out the obvious, that whoever he was, he did not have access to Parashat Rabbi Eliezer, who is a contrarian and considers even the name of Avram to be a blemished name. Now, in Leviticus 22:27, after the enumeration of blemishes in an animal, on verse 27, the Torah indicates that unblemished animals may be brought to the altar. This echoes the preparedness of the person who is only ready as a figurative sacrifice on the 8th day for his own milah. Now, following Abraham's bris, he walked with Hashem as a tamim, sacrificially ready, and Yaakov was also described as a tamim, as Yaakov ish tamim. Isaac, as I have maintained, is no longer tamim because he was indeed sacrificed as a tamim, but is no longer one. In fact, Isaac possessed a blemish, which is blindness, which is the first disqualification in that section in Leviticus. Still, the question begs and remains, why milah and why the foreskin? To add to this question, why do Chazal consider milah to be the prerequisite for the Torah? It's not in the Ten Commandments, because it's a prerequisite. Bereshit Rabbah 17 says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ila mala nimo Avraham Avinu, lo nitna Torah liYisrael, shenemar, v'yamadel Yaakov l'chok liYisrael, Brit olam. Rabbi Akiva indicates that the covenant of the pieces, which is Bein HaBetarim, was an insufficient covenant to receive the Torah. Only the milah, the covenant of milah, which was the prerequisite. Parenthetically, the pasuk is v'yamidel Yaakov l'chok. L'chok could be a play on words because the Aramaic for unmletem is gazartem, and chok and gazar could resonate with each other. So now in Bereshit and Shmot Rabbah 30, Gedola milah shekol hamitzvot shenitztave Gedola milah shekol hamitzvot shenitztavu Yisrael lo nitnu ela al yedei milah. Meaning that all the 613 mitzvot were on account of the milah. In fact, without milah, the Torah becomes unlearnable, as it says in Mechot Rabbi Shmuel 12. Kol mi sheyesh bo milah yachol lilmod Torah, shenemar v'hamedeh la'akov l'chok l'Yisrael Brit olam. Again, they cite the same pasuk, and it seems that it's a prerequisite for learning Torah, or to get the Torah, or to deserve the Torah, is the Brit milah. Now, the Zohar might not be a rabbinic text, but it is treated like a rabbinic text. And the Zohar 49b, I lo nimol Abraham lo have kaim al brita v'lo have mehesav oraisa lezare. There are two elements to the Brit milah according to the Zohar. First, the milah, and then the bris. First, the circumcision, only afterwards it's the covenant. And then you receive the Torah. That's a very close reading, but it's very intended, which means that there are in fact two parts to the milah. The milah is the physical act, and then the covenant. Parenthetically, without milah, there's no Pesach sacrifice, because you can't have Pesach sacrifice if you're an arel, which culminates with the Sinai theophany, because Pesach begins on the first day, and then it goes all the way through Sukkot with the giving of the Torah. So they are linked as a fundamental prerequisite for the Pesach, which then leads to the giving of the Torah. But why? How about Shabbat? Or honoring one's parents? Or just emunah? Why is milah so important that it's a fundamental and a priori? There may have been many righteous people since the late Stone Age, and many monotheists, but Abraham is singled out as unique. Abraham's faith in God is pervasive in the narrative. Chazal even add more instances than in the explicit text to demonstrate Abraham's faith. At the end of Parashat Noach, he risked his life, being hurled into the fire, and was saved by his firm faith. Then he had 10 tests in the next two Parashiot. God didn't deliver, but gave him only promises, and yet the pasuk says, "Vayachshaveha lo tzedakah." So his faith is explicit, it's not implicit. However, early in Parashat Vayera, God says something strange to himself. This is such an unusual way that God talks to himself, because very infrequently does God talk to himself. And in this case, it's rhetorically, it might only be the only time in the entire Tanakh where God talks in such a strange way. He says, and this is a unique case of God mulling over a dilemma. V'Hashem amar, hamechaseh ani me'Avraham asher ani oseh. God says, should I not tell Abraham what I'm about to do? God's about to destroy Sodom. Now the pasuk says, "Avraham hayo yeh legoy gadol ve'atzum, v'nivruchu vo kol goy haaretz ki yadativ laman asher yitzaved banav ve'peito acharav v'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah mishpat laman havi Hashem al Avraham et asher diber alav." God is impressed with Abraham's spiritual plan. Abraham is a doer who will teach the next generation the way of God, to perform righteousness and justice. The verse is taking place when Abraham is a 99-year-old man without a son from Sarah, and God's talking about how Abraham will be teaching the next generations. Can you imagine wanting something from God, and God is already talking about the fruit of your deeds and that it's going to last generations? What singles out Abraham is his strategic mission statement. Number 1, live with emunah and bitachon. Number 2, teach it to the next generations. Number 3, teach it to the next generations to teach it to the next generations. Number 4, repeat. Abraham is the forefather, not only because ba'avur avotenu Shabbat chuvacha, because of our forefathers who had bitachon in you, but because of his sustainable education model to teach the next generations. While others might seek nirvana on the top of a mountain, Avraham Avinu is fundraising for the elementary schools, and he's fundraising for the school's building fund. How often does God think to himself, and how often does he explain why he's going to do good to somebody? Let's go back to the foreskin question. Where in the body are the generations produced? From which organ does the future of the chosen people come from? If you are going to make an everlasting covenant representing the future, then do it where the future is produced. That's the location where the covenant sprouts from. Now, parenthetically, what about women? Are women chopped liver? Last time I checked, women do have something to do, at least biologically, with the future of Klal Yisrael, and also, if it wasn't for women, then the children themselves wouldn't be Jewish. So I would say that women have something to do with it. The answer is already given by the Zohar. First comes the milah, then comes the covenant. Abraham cuts the foreskin, but that's not the covenant. It precipitates the covenant. Women are themselves also partners with God covenant, but not on day 8, rather on day 0 or day 1. The reason why we cut the foreskin and not a banana peel or some postmodern symbolic fruit is because Abraham was chosen for his sustainable model. Laman asher tzavet banav acharav v'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. And the foreskin is the location of that sustainable model. In other words, until one seeks a generationally sustainable model for teaching God's tzedakah and mishpat, that person is blemished. The bris is an everlasting pact that we believe in God's tzedakah umishpat, and capital A, capital N, capital D, we will teach it to the next generation, and we will teach them to teach it to the next generation. That individual has embarked on the journey of tamim. Hitalech lefanai v'heya tamim. But what about those who don't have children? Do they lack the covenant? Recall that Abraham was a builder of the future. The most famous pun in Rabbinic Judaism is the following: Al tikre banaich ela bonaich. Do not read your children, but your builders, or those things that you are building. Builders and children are interchangeable. They are both bets on the future. Having children is betting on the future. Betting on the future with other methods without children is also betting on the future. Abraham was righteous, but his milah was the reason why we have the Torah, because he was a builder. Al tikra banaich ela bonaich. Do not read it as your children, rather as your buildings. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom.